I see we are just joined by David. Perfect
Oh,
timing,
that
David.
too.
We just let everyone in, and I'm about to start with the preamble. So, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for a design subcommittee of the Boston Civic Design Commission. Today's date is Tuesday, February 18th, and this is session B of the BCDC Design Subcommittee. The Planning Department continues hosting public meetings in a virtual setting for the health, safety, and accessibility of Boston residents. I'm Christina Rico, Executive Director of the Boston Civic Design Commission and Senior Urban Designer at the City of Boston Planning Department. Before we proceed with the agenda, the open meeting law requires that I notify the public that this meeting is being recorded. Therefore, please be aware that the Commission staff is making an audio and video recording of this meeting. Please turn off your camera and microphone if you do not wish to be recorded. And for the purposes of the record, Commissioners Easley, Gillies Smith, Manfredi, and Ron join us this evening for the discussion. Tonight's agenda will include a presentation for Phase 2 of the L Street Station redevelopment, also known as 776 Summer Street, South Boston. Tonight's meeting proceedings will follow the typical BCDC Design Subcommittee meeting format, beginning with a brief presentation from the proponent, comments from BCDC commissioners, and public testimony. And before I turn it over to the proponent team to give a presentation, I'm just going to read a really brief description here, a very dry description of the project, which is that a proposed project known as Phase 2 of the L Street Station redevelopment at 776 Summer Street, South Boston, seeking Article 80B entitlement, contemplates the development of approximately 1,025,500 square feet of residential, hotel, office, and retail uses, and approximately 1,214 off-street parking spaces in 4 buildings on an approximately 6.8 acre portion of the 15.2 acre site in accordance with the previously approved PDA master plan and development plan. This will be the first presentation of the proposed project to the design subcommittee following an introduction at the monthly meeting just 2 weeks ago on February 4th, 2025. It is my understanding that there are no commissioners present who intend to recuse themselves from deliberations. And a quick reminder to the proponent team that presentations will be limited to 15 minutes, although this evening, this proponent is the only thing on the agenda, so I'm going to be loosey with the timing. Planning Department staff will give presenters a 2-minute warning. And with that, I would invite the proponent team to begin presenting. However, you first have to promote everyone to co-host and want to invite our co-chair, Linda Easley, to give any additional instruction to the proponent team.
Thanks, Christina. I think many of us have had a chance to look at the packet, so thank you for that. We had one suggestion. We really appreciate you digging into a lot of the elevation slides, and those are part of the deck. We are hoping we can have you reverse the order and begin with some of those long sections first. And this is, very workshopy tonight, so it doesn't need to be very polished. So if we can jump to those as you're getting into the discussion of the kind of grade changes across the site, do the sections first, and then we can go back to the spot elevation drawings. I think that would be really helpful to us.
Sure thing. We can do that.
I am still elevating. This is a long list of folks, but I think I've got Catherine and Melissa and Kernst and John. I'm still working on elevating Victor, Colin, Tim, Jason, and Devin, but you guys can get started if you're ready.
Sure. If it helps, Colin and Jared and Victor are 3 that will be presenting, so you can elevate them first and as you fit through the scene. So thank you, Christina and team. And good evening, everyone. For those of you who may not be familiar, my name is Kernst Pialui, and I'm with the Mixed Use Development team here at HRP. And on behalf of the entire 776 project team, we want to thank you for your time today as we go through our Phase 2 project updates. Next slide. Quick glance at our project team, who Christine is trying to feverishly onboard. Today, the focus will just be with FO and Gensler, as we'll be going through the agenda in terms of public realm and urban form. But just as a note, we do have all of the project team members here in the event there are any building specific questions. Next slide. for tonight, we understand we're the only item on the agenda. Thank you for that. And we want to be able to talk you through our material here. Our intention is that we take about 25 minutes to present so that we can open up more than enough time for conversation and discussion as we look to move forward. And before we get to that, I wanted to, and get out of your hair, I wanted to go over the design items that will go through the agenda, right? We're going to start with what we heard, which will be peppered in throughout the rest of the discussion for tonight. We're then going to go through just a recap of what was approved in phase 1 to help bridge the gap to the phase 2 master plan. We'll talk through the public realm vision, and in that, Linda, we'll take note of flip-flopping and putting the sections first.
Thanks,
And then we'll
Karen.
walk through the urban form considerations there. So with that, I'll turn it over to Colin and our colleagues at FO.
Great. Thanks, Currents. Thank you, Commissioners. Colin Curley, I'm a Senior Associate with Field Operations. We're the landscape architects for the project. So just wanted to begin here with a bit of what we heard from our meeting with you a couple weeks ago. We're here this evening to discuss mostly the public realm and urban form composition. And our understanding from our previous discussion was that our path forward is another double session focused on blocks A, B, and E, followed by a follow-up session focused on block C. With regard to the public realm, I think what we heard a lot was, trying to help elucidate and make more clear the kind of comprehensive picture of site grading, understanding how buildings and streets and public realm all relate to one another, as well as circulation and location of service. Understanding as well the corridors around the site, Summer Street, East First Street, and Thomas Edison Way, knowing the kind of the experience of those corridors. And we have some three-dimensional drawings and animations later that will kind of speak to that. How Thomas Edison Way transitions the service drive to make clear that the path is turning towards M Street, and also kind of the overall rationale behind our retail strategy site-wide. For urban form, looking at kind of our overall composition, particularly as it relates to between A, B, and E, given that they're all kind of this, composition with block F at that corner of Thomas Edison Way. Understanding the kind of more rectilinear edges that are at the site's perimeter versus the kind of more open and kind of deconstructed interior of the site. Understanding the undulation of the street wall on East First Street. And we are working now on producing a physical model, but then for this evening, we do have some 3D walkthroughs prepared to share with you. If you go to the next slide, please, just to kind of reorient folks to the phase 1 and phase 2 master plan. If you go to the next slide. This is phase 1 here. So the 2 lab research buildings, blocks D and F, and turbine halls 1, 2, and 3 at the center of the site, with most of the public realm concentrated on the waterfront. If you go to the next slide. Now looking at the phase 2 development, blocks A and B as residential buildings, block C, another lab office building, and block E in the 1898 building together, hotel and residential building. Public realm really being the spaces around these buildings, streetscapes, and the Edison Plaza between blocks E and F. And the next slide here just shows both phases together and kind of the overall full build vision. Moving on to the next slide. So we'll start kind of by going through public realm. And I think I'll start just here with this kind of overall context slide here, situating our public open space within the context of South Boston. So Medal of Honor Park, Christopher Lee Playground, the dog park, and Thomas Butler Memorial Park. That green dashed line indicating that we're kind of really filling in a missing link within the Harbor Walk. So really working to connect our site both to open spaces within South Boston as well as the city more broadly. And next slide. Maybe I can just speak to this one and then we can jump to the sections just to kind of give a little bit of an overall orientation here. So our site high point is up at block A at elevation 36. And then the site kind of is like a table sloping down towards Summer Street. So we're at elevation 21 at the freight corridor in Summer Street. We're also at elevation 21 at the intersection of East First Street and Summer Street. We have a local high point in Summer Street at 22, where Thomas Edison Way comes out. And then importantly, we're at elevation 30, where M Street and East First Street meet. So those are kind of setting a lot of the elevations that we're meeting at the edges, as well as what we're able to do in terms of taking up those grades on the interior of the site. So two other quick spot elevations I'd draw your attention to are the 28.75 at Thomas Edison Way. We're meeting East First Street, and then we need to come down and meet the turbine halls down at elevation 22.2. So there's some stress on that portion of Thomas Edison Way. If we could maybe, Kate, jump to the sections, we can then kind of set a little bit what's going on across the site. So here, this site section is cutting through Block F and the lower waterfront. We have a tiered waterfront strategy for resilience. So you can see kind of to the left-hand side of the section, there's some terraced lawns that are making their way down. And then the lower waterfront there is down at an elevation of 18.5. If you go to the next section, this one's cut up a little bit further. So this is now cutting through the upper waterfront. That's at around elevation 22. And then again, what you're seeing on the left-hand side there are a series of kind of sloping lawns and pathways that are making their way from the Edison Plaza down to the upper waterfront. Going to the next section, you can see here kind of these pockets of open space now. You've got the Edison Plaza on the left, linking blocks F and E at elevations around 31. The next kind of pocket of open space that you see between Turbine Hall and Block D is Turbine Alley. And then to the far right-hand side, you can see the street frontage on Summer Street. Jumping to the next section slice, you can see now on the left-hand side, Thomas Edison Way between blocks A and B. The next little chunk of open space as you're coming down is the kind of loading zone between Block B and Turbine Hall 3. The next one down being Turbine Alley as it's making its way to East First Street. And then again, the frontage there along Summer Street. Next section. So this is Turbine Alley. This is fairly level. We're keeping this all around 22.5, so it's consistent with the waterfront. However, it's a tiny blip here. We'll see it in 3D later, but we do need to make a grade transition to meet East First Street on the left-hand side of the page there as it's climbing up. Next slide. This is through the Edison Plaza, looking towards blocks F and A. Here again, the grade's pretty level, staying kind of at around elevation 30 or 31. But you do see a retaining wall and a dip on the left-hand side there for the connection down to the dedicated freight corridor. The next section is just mirrored. So now you're looking back towards blocks B and E. But again, grades here holding pretty steady and then sloping down towards the waterfront on the right-hand side there. I think that's it for sections. So maybe we can jump back up to the grading plan. I think we don't need to really dwell on the, can you go to slide 12 real quick? Thanks, Kate. I won't dwell on it because we did send it in advance, and thank you for taking a look. Happy to come back to any one of these to talk through any grades in more detail. But here again, just wanting to point out the grades around the perimeter. So 25 at Turbine Alley, 30 at M Street, 36 at A. And so then we're working internally to try to set these elevations to really maximize the amount of street frontage that each one of these blocks is able to have to strengthen the connectivity to the public realm and surrounding streets. The next two slides here are just enlarged grading plans that we can come back to if we need to. And if you go to the next slide here, so this we have a series of 3D drawings to kind of help walk through some of the grade change here. This is related back to the kind of overall open space precincts. So you can see the Edison Plaza, as I was mentioning in the sections, hovering largely at around elevation 31. At the center of the site, the turbine precinct, predominantly at about elevation 22. That's Turbine Alley. So we're really trying to meet that elevation, though it does climb as you make your way up to Thomas Edison Way to around 27. The lower waterfront, as that first section indicated, is a bit lower at 18.5. The upper waterfront generally at 22. So again, trying to keep that consistent with all of those buildings as well as Turbine Alley, but it does climb up again to meet Edison Plaza. And then the Summer Street Gateway, really looking at meeting the grades of Summer Street, and then also looking at areas where we are taking up some grade to meet resilient finished floor elevations for blocks D and C. If you go to the next slide, we'll just kind of walk through some 3D views here. So this is looking southwest at the waterfront. You can see that kind of tiered waterfront strategy, upper waterfront around elevation 22, lower waterfront at 18.5 with accessible slopes, mitigating the grade transition there. And block D and Turbine Hall at 22.5, 1898 being up at elevation 30. So when we turn and look the other way on the next slide, you can see 1898 at elevation 30 together with block E, kind of relating to that elevated public realm associated more with the Edison Plaza. And then those lawns and sloped walks that are making that grade change happen from elevations in the 30s down to 22 at the upper waterfront. If we go to the next slide, this is now just turning and looking back towards the waterfront with that kind of overlook lawn in front of you. Block F would be behind you. And so you can see here holding their kind of an elevated public space at block E in 1898 at around elevation 30, and the lawns and sloped walks making their way down to the upper and lower waterfronts beyond. Next slide turns and looks down the Edison Plaza towards Thomas Edison Way. Between blocks E and F, this is a relatively level plaza. So we've got seamless grade transition across and into building finished floor elevations, E being at 30 and F being at 31.75. We go to the next slide. Now we're moving into the intersection of Thomas Edison Way. I apologize, please disregard the 24 and 22.7. Those are errors, should not be there. That is nowhere near where we are. We're up at 29 and 30 at this intersection. You can see the 31 off to the left. That's near the entrance of block B, so that's what's setting our finished floor elevation there. We're continuing to study this corner from a design standpoint, but here we're looking at kind of a split strategy of an elevation 31 area associated with the building and a more public space down at 29. But I mentioned before the stretch of Thomas Edison Way that's got some stress on it. You can see that really from that intersection going down, we're maxing out our sidewalk slopes to get down to the turbine halls. So if you go to the next slide, this is now turning and looking at block E. So again, the kind of maxed out accessible slopes along the sidewalk so that you can make your way down to turbine halls, but then also creating that kind of flush hotel and residential drop-off zone, meeting block E's finished floor at 30. So we have a 4.9% slope coming up to it. We've also introduced a stair and switchback path in front of the drop-off there that provides direct entry in line with the hotel. So bringing you up to that kind of flush pickup drop-off zone. And then you can see in the background there that driveway diving down to meet the loading elevation. And then the plaza again hovering at around elevation 30. So the next slide just switches around, looks from the turbine halls back up. So you can see really the sidewalk being that accessible path of travel coming from the turbine halls up to the Edison Plaza. That switchback near where Kate's cursor is right now being the kind of accessible path, taking you back up in a more direct route to the hotel entrance. And that 9.5% slope there being for vehicles coming back down, headed either to Thomas Edison Way or to parking. Next slide.
Colin, while you're on that
Yes.
one, slide 22. Yes. So I know that we chatted a little bit 2 weeks ago about the service drive, and is that kind of what's in the front of that slide? I guess yes. So that's coming off of Thomas Edison Way. Kind of,
correct.
so there'd be a curb cut there, and it kind of crosses the bike lane, it crosses the sidewalk there. And then is that also the parking access? So service and parking are the same?
That's correct. Yeah, service and parking are the same there. The model is a little rough, so I think we don't have the nuance of that in here. So where it's kind of that darker tan, that's parking and loading for E in 1898. Then you can see there's a green planted strip in between. And then further towards the foreground is loading for the switch house and the turbine halls. So where we can, we're looking to kind of break up the monotony of that sort of, paved apron with planting and other design elements.
So
But yes,
this is service and this is parking.
the tan is both service and parking for 1898 and the hotel.
Okay. Okay.
Yep. They're just separated by that planting strip.
Got it.
So then next slide, this is Turbine Alley. So I mentioned the East First Street elevations are kind of coming down. Where Turbine Alley meets East First Street, it's around elevation 25. That was already accounted for in the design of the turbine halls. So the turbine hall elevation at that corner is 25.5. Block C on the ground floor, we're looking at an elevation of 23.5 to sort of split the difference between Turbine Alley and Summer Street. So that's creating this condition at the corner here where we have these tiered seat walls that are providing that kind of continuous flush accessible entry into the ground floor of Block C, and also facilitating the grade change from East First into Turbine Alley. Where you see the 22.5 tag, that's the finished floor of that entrance into the turbine halls and the remainder of the turbine halls as they make their way to the waterfront. So the next slide just kind of takes that same view and turns around. So you can see the seat walls there that are mitigating that grade transition from the 22.5 of Turbine Alley and the rest of the turbine halls. And then up to Block C at 23.5 and up back to East First Street at 25 in the distance. Next slide. Those are the sections. And then to your question, Linda, we'll just talk through quickly here the kind of overall circulation, parking, loading across the site here. So the red lines you see here are the vehicular circulation along Thomas Edison Way, as well as that loop for the hotel pickup drop-off at Block E. The brown lines are the service access. So for many of the buildings, that's coming from Thomas Edison Way or the service drive via either Thomas Edison Way or the freight corridor. The dark green lines are the bike circulation, and then you can see the kind of dashed blue being the pedestrian movement. The next slide illustrates the parking and loading entries. So that one at 1898 is a combined parking and loading entry. Since we don't have parking or loading from either East First Street or Summer Street, Thomas Edison Way is kind of our workhorse here. So we're doing what we can to try to consolidate, and as I mentioned, either through landscaping and through building articulation, work to kind of minimize the visual impact of the loading as best we can, and ensure a pleasant public realm experience for folks walking up and down Thomas Edison Way. And I think with that, I'll pass it over to the Gensler team.
Thanks, Colin. So just as Kate flips, I'm Jared Krieger. I'm with the Gensler team. We're working on the master plan as well as Block C, and I'm joined by my colleague, Victor Pichatti. So we're circling back to what we heard in this series of diagrams. We're just going to walk through some of the questions about the orthogonal geometry along the exterior of the site as compared to the more dynamic geometry on the interior of the site. Like many master plan projects, there are forces that influence a series of open spaces and street grids and ultimately the building geometry. So these are forces or what has driven the planning, and we're going to walk through some of that. We believe that this has led to just a proactive idea that enhances the public realm and letting the urban forces lead to a creative approach that ultimately shapes the buildings and the blocks. And that's what we're circling back to address. So first showing the axonometric view, which is basically the end result of the full build out. As a reminder, the grayed out buildings are part of phase 1, And we're talking about phase 2 today, which are the buildings shown in the colors. And then next slide is the kind of full build out plan at the ground floor cut. This is just showing, as Colin just mentioned, Thomas Edison Way is kind of the workhorse street that circulates through the site, because we didn't want to have and didn't land with any curb cuts aside from the road cutting going through on Summer Street and First Avenue. Ultimately, what we're calling just a really hardworking street, as well as orienting active uses both on the outside of the site and the inside of the site. So next slide, just starting with the progressive build of the site. The rectilinear edges obviously create the perimeter of the site, with East First Street and Summer Street ultimately coming together at a right angle. And then the dedicated freight corridor, which is cut at an angle through the site, basically set up the boundaries of the site. And then 1898 building and the turbine halls are obviously historic, rectilinear, and really unique assets that the site has. Then, as we started with the planning, and other groups collaborated on this with the team, Elkin Street and M Street, you want to cut those through at 90-degree angles, keep it orthogonal like the site. But there are certain site constraints that kind of prevented that from happening. And ultimately, when you looked at trying to get a road through the existing turbine halls, we jogged the road to the south, to the right on the plan, to coordinate with specific structural bays, ultimately trying to coordinate lintels, removal of structure, while also balancing how close we were to the 1898 building. So trying to fit a roadway, the sidewalks, the bike paths through appropriately, and give a buffer to the 1898 building ultimately led to the geometry being a little bit more dynamic and jogging to the south as you get through. But the benefit was leading to certain things that could enhance the pedestrian realm, as well as some other forces we're about to show you. But we really want to celebrate the turbine halls by giving this buffer and stepping back from, especially the 1898 building. Because if the roadway ran directly through on the Elkin Street axis, it basically wouldn't have enough room for a road and a sidewalk. It would be right up against the building. So this creates pretty unique geometry that activates and differentiates what's happening on the inside of the site versus what's happening on the outside of the site. Another big component was, I'm sorry, so this basically just shows you the setbacks and all the different energy that's basically created through with Edison Way coming through on the site, rather than being at orthogonal angles. Then another big component of how the plan was devised was thinking through how we can connect from the existing Medal of Honor Park. So Colin was showing you a little bit wider of a view of the multiple green spaces that are being connected. And for a long time, this site basically sat as a disconnecting potential pedestrian and future pedestrian pathways. So this is walking through and connecting the Medal of Honor Park through the site, not just focusing on the vehicle, but also focusing on the pedestrian. The pretty significant waterfront open space that Colin just showed, also connecting with the newly opened waterfront along the water over there on the north side of the site, just on the other side of Summer Street. Next slide. Ultimately, it created something really dynamic in the middle of the site. The commission noted last time that we discussed this, that the circulation patterns kind of meet at the intersection of Thomas Edison Way there. And we feel that that's creating something unique and something special there as the vehicles turn one way or another, but the pedestrians, and potentially opening up to the views towards the open space in the waterfront. So next slides. Now, if we start to lay on some of the simple forms, so this is basically showing on phase 2 what the simple buildable parcel geometries could be. And then we start to layer in certain angles and pedestrians and view corridors to give visibility to 1898. As it was brought up, the potential signature piece that is blocky at the center of the site. Now, as the pedestrian gets further into the site from these critical vantage points, that starts to indicate some of the carving back for the buildings and driving some of the building geometries. So as you can see, as you get to Thomas Edison Way and into the plaza space, it continues to open up the views into the plaza and beyond. And when you're on the higher topography there, as you come around, there's just incredible views of the skyline and beyond. So then same on block C, using that to our advantage, the angular roadway gives you an excellent view of the turbine halls, but it also gives us the advantage on block C where we can articulate the architecture to screen some of the back of the house functions, like the loading dock area on block C. Layering it all together, it kind of creates a really dynamic space right as you're entering the site at the bend of Thomas Edison Way. That's where we really have a unique moment, and the architecture of the buildings is starting to address that. We're going to show this a little bit more in some three-dimensional views. And then lastly, on the outside of the site, thinking along East First Street, it's one of the constraints that we've had from the beginning is that the turbine hall 3 basically sits right on the edge of East First Street. There isn't any room for a sidewalk there. So that created a pretty unique opportunity that's special to this site, advancing to bring an advantage to the pedestrian experience, to actually be able to circulate through the turbine halls. So as you've seen in some of the earlier presentations, that's basically a connection throughway wall. Meanwhile, we can preserve the turbine hall. And there's a little bit of an image inlaid in the top right where you can see that pedestrian sidewalk cutting through. But what we've done with the architecture on blocks B and C in particular is you start to angle the buildings in, especially at the pedestrian scale, to give more visibility to the old historic facades that are being preserved and restored as part of the development, so that you can pass through and have better sight lines to those facades. And then on block A, there's been some specific gestures to push the building in and setting back along East First Street. Really enables the blue bike stations, which is adjacent to the actual program bike storage spaces within the building, to create some synergies of what's happening on the inside of the building versus what's happening on the outside of the building. And then similarly along Summer Street, I know you remembered block D from phase 1, where there's some push into the building, the notch, which denotes the entrance. We're making a similar gesture on block C, moving it in a little bit more, basically also making room for the bike station, the bus stop, the pedestrian circulation that's out there. Ultimately, and lastly, this is kind of the full build of the geometry of the master plan, which we think, using some of the unique forces that drive the master plan, whether it's under our control or not, to really create something dynamic in the site. All right, Victor.
Good evening, commissioners. Great to be with you again. The remainder of the presentation will focus almost entirely on the 3D pedestrian level experiences throughout the site. So we're going to take you through 4 diagrams and 4 animations, which will take us to the finish line. So thank you for your patience in this thorough presentation. This first view is focused on the experience looking into the heart of the site from Medal of Honor Park. The building forms that you see are based on the zoning defined envelopes. And if I can call your attention to the dark outlines on blocks B to the left and A to the right, those are the areas that you'll see begin to get modified based on the criteria shared by Jared. So next slide, Kate. This is the proposed view that indicates on block B, the upper 4 levels have been recessed to separate an upper portion of the building with a base. Along block A has been subdivided into 3 different massing forms. The form in the foreground has been rotated to help open the view and frame the view beyond. Block B has taken on a small angle, which will be viewed better in the diagrams to come. Next slide, Kate. This slide just takes us a step closer as we're entering the site, once again beginning with the massing as defined by the zoning envelope. The next slide, showing some of the changes. Here you see that on block B, the building length has been made to feel shorter by chamfering the inside face and stepping it, and therefore opening up views to the historic 1898 building earlier upon arrival into the site. And along the edge of block A, where that cants, you can see the development of a linear plaza. Both of these buildings bookending together frame a view of Block E, which when we were with you last time was discussed as something that could really be a showpiece or a center point anchoring that inner portion of the site. Next slide. So what we'll do next is show you 4 slides that will preface the 4 animation paths that we will take through the site. And Kate, you can go to the first one. Basically, 2 of the animations are going to focus on the primary site perimeters, and 2 of them will go right through the site. The first animation will walk along Summer Street, beginning at the north and moving along the blocks towards the south. The next animation will take us all the way along East First Street, going from west to east, passing through the Turbine Hall 3 arcade and the buildings on either side of it. The next path will take us from Medal of Honor Park along between blocks A and B, and has chosen a path to navigate through Edison Plaza and along the waterfront experience. And lastly, we'll enter the site at the intersection of Summer Street and Thomas Edison Way, follow Thomas Edison Way the entire way through the site to the point where it makes a right turn in Block E and reconnects to East First Street. So if technology cooperates well, Kate, let's go ahead and kick off the first animation. Thank you. So here we're going to cross over Summer Street, looking eastward. As we turn to go south, we're going to walk by a dog park and an outdoor recreational sort of half-court basketball court to our left. As we pass by that, we will turn towards the east to get a quick overview onto the waterfront promenade. You can see some of the historical artifacts that will be preserved from the Edison power plant. Now, as we walk along the facade of Block D, this is the inset portion of the mass that frames and signals the building main entrance. And then the remainder of Block B at the sidewalk level is set 5 feet back from the setback to help provide some better indoor-outdoor relationships. Here we're arriving at the Summer Street, Thomas Edison Way intersection with the 4-story base of Block C beyond that we're passing by now. The west face of Block C folds inward from both intersections, again, to signal architecturally where the building entrance is, create an alcove for the blue bike stations, as well as a linear plaza that will welcome transit riders that are getting off the bus on Summer Street. Okay, Kate, whenever you're ready, we can go to the East First Street animation. Thank you. So this one's a better view of the 4-story tall podium at Block C, which helps bring down the scale of the 10-story building. The first level of Block C folds away from the setback line. Here we see it folding toward Turbine Alley in deference to the new arcade that passes through Turbine Hall 3. On the other side of the pass-through, Block B also has a recess at the base to ease the transition from the arcade. As we move along the first level of Block B, we haven't coordinated doors and access yet, but those are all storefront retail openings. Here, we're crossing over Thomas Edison Way, and to our left, this provides a good view of the plaza created by the rotation in the Block A mass, and we can see the view towards Block E beyond. Finishing the journey along East First Street, you'll see Block A pull back from East First. It's something Jared mentioned in the plan to create a generous alcove to host the blue bike stations, the storefront behind those providing some of the bike amenities for residents in the building. Okay, Kate, whenever you're ready, we can jump to the waterfront experience. So we're beginning with Medal of Honor Park to our back here, and we're walking northward along Block A. The Block A Plaza extends to the Block A residential main entrance, which was just off to our right. As we continue to move north, we're going to turn briefly down Thomas Edison Way to show the portal through the turbine halls in the distance. As we cross over and move a little bit to the west, it'll bring us closer to see the Port Cochere drop-off that serves the Block E hotel and residential. And now, once again, looking towards the north, we'll pass through the Edison Plaza as we make our way towards the waterfront. The inflection point on Block E folds back away, really allowing a wide open view of the waterfront from Thomas Edison Plaza. Here, we'll turn left back towards the west and walk down the terraces of the waterfront promenade as we negotiate the elevations and the various terraces that Colin had shared earlier. As we get to a lower elevation, we're going to flip the camera back and you will see some of the new large openings that are proposed for the 1898 building to really open that up to the bosque of trees that we are walking through right now. I forgot to mention something very important. These dark gray masses focus on the phase 1 buildings, and the lighter gray are phase 2. That was something you requested, and I apologize, I didn't mention that earlier. Here we're going to turn all the way around, and in our foreground will be a proposed water feature that's part of the front plaza of the 1898 building, and we'll stop seeing the Turbine Hall 1 facade in our foreground and 1898 directly adjacent to it. Okay, one more to go, Thomas Edison Way. Here we're crossing Summer Street, and we'll follow Thomas Edison Way throughout the site. You can see the entrance into the site bookended by the 4-story prow on Block C, as well as the massive Block E. We'll follow the sidewalk along the serpentine jog in the street that frames the approach into this portal through the turbine halls. The portal is designed such that, Kate, may I ask you to go back a little bit? It jumped for me just a bit. Just a little bit of a glitch there. Thank you. So here we get a peek down Turbine Alley towards the waterfront, and then through the portal, it has a nice separation between a pedestrian-only experience as well as a vehicular experience. This movement provides a good view and experience of walking up the grade to the higher point of the site, with the Port Cochere to the hotel framed in the view now. You can see the car as if it's exiting the hotel drop-off. As we arrive at the higher point of the site, we'll take a quick look to the left, which looks out onto the waterfront. And then we will turn and walk towards down Thomas Edison Way towards M Street, where we'll see both the base of Block A and Block B. Both blocks are lined at the base with transparent storefront that is all active program, one of 3 programs, either retail, building amenities, or building lobby. So all of this entire experience along Thomas Edison Way is highly activated. And we're stopping here looking west on East First Street. Thank you for listening to that marathon of narration. Melissa, I'll pass it back to you for, I believe, our closing slide. Or Ernst, I'm sorry.
Nope, all good. Appreciate that, Victor. So appreciate the patience. I'll echo Victor's comments there, commissioners. I'll appreciate the patience through that, but we do hope that we were able to kind of provide a lot of the views and thoughts and ideas that you'd presented prior. With that, Christina and team will turn it over for any questions and answers.
Sure, and I'm happy to give this straight to the commissioners for deliberation. I just want to acknowledge that Commissioner Mimi Love joins us this evening, but is recused from the project and will not be participating in deliberations. I'm sorry that I failed to mention that earlier at the top. So Linda and commissioners, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Christina. And I just want to say thank you to this team. That was an incredibly clear presentation. The diagrams were amazing, and it was great to have all of those walkthroughs. So I know it took us a little longer to get through all of those slides, but I think it was really worth it. And we didn't get to meet you, Kate, but thank you for driving.
Of course.
All right.
You're allowed on camera too, Kate. She's doing all the hard work.
I didn't see Kate's face on camera, but we wanted to acknowledge your good work as well. Could we put up a site plan? You can choose what slide makes the most sense, and that'll help us have a jumping off point for commissioner comments. So commissioners, if you have any comments for the team, feel free to raise your Zoom hand. And if your Zoom hand isn't working, I'll kind of keep my eyes peeled for a regular hand as well. I don't see any hands just yet. So, oh, Shauna, I see yours.
Go ahead, Linda. You can
And
go ahead
Bill.
if you want.
So I can add just a few comments as commissioners are teeing up. And, I'm really excited for this project. I think it's terrific. It's been great to see it emerge as we've gone through the phase 1 projects and now the phase 2 projects. And these days, you never know if phase 1 is going to get built first or phase 2 is going to get built first. So it'll be interesting to see how that all comes about. I wanted to focus really on two things. And maybe we could go to slide 10. Yes, this is great. So one of the things that really intrigues me is Turbine Alley. And I was expecting it actually to show up here in green as one of the pedestrian corridors that helps to stitch the site together. And I imagine myself as a pedestrian maybe coming from the west, coming along East First Street and wanting to enter the site. And I, certainly could do that by making a left on Summer and then a right. But the other way that we could do it is to kind of come in between Turbine Hall 3 and Block C. And so I'd love to kind of understand that. One of the things that I was watching for in the presentation, I didn't see it, but I might have missed it, is really what the architectural expression is on the east side of Block C. And the reason I'm asking is that I think that there is a really handsome kind of facade along the west side of Turbine Hall 3. And as it continues both from that kind of green color all the way and then over to the other Turbine Hall on the north. And I think that this could be a really lovely passageway. And so I'd love to see it developed like that. And again, love to understand a little bit more about the treatment of Block C and how you would experience that as a pedestrian. So that's one piece. And then the second kind of comment that I didn't hear a lot about in the presentation today is really the relationship of I want to call it the service drive spur, and its relationship to Block A, Block A's geometry, and its relationship to the site and to East First Street. And one of the things that I was looking at was actually on slide 47, if you don't mind going there. So in slide 47, we actually see a much simplified geometry of Block A. And in some ways it's more in keeping with the geometries of B and C because you've got more sides that are parallel to one another. And I know one of the things we talked about 2 weeks ago is, why we have the twist in block A. And the reason that this is coming up for me now, and that I wanted to look at this diagram again, is that I'm not really sure how to think about Service Drive, that one spur. It either wants to be a pedestrian realm or it doesn't want to be a pedestrian realm. And I think having block A kind of twist and offer a pedestrian realm there is a bit confusing because I think it really isn't a block that you're welcoming pedestrians into. And so I think it all gets connected. And I wonder if the team could think a little bit about, how we change the primary kind of nature of Thomas Edison Way and the way that it makes that 90-degree turn out to East First Street, and how we think about that Service Drive spur. And can there be some kind of visual cues that a pedestrian has that they know that that kind of block really terminates at a dead end, and maybe has a different streetscape character that comes with it, so that we are continuing to focus on the kind of primary nature of Thomas Edison Way. So for me, having a simpler block A and having a different kind of street section for the Service Drive go hand in hand into providing a clarity for the primary kind of Thomas Edison Way. The footnote to that also is that I actually really like the geometry of block A in this slide for another reason, and that is that I think that it makes a lot of sense to have this wedge the way it's being shown here, because it really does capture that sight line from Medal of Honor Park all the way into the site and then beyond even to the kind of that magenta view corridor. So those were the two things I'd love to hear more about, the turbine alley, and then also all of these different ingredients that go into the kind of street experience and the experience of block A in general.
We do have members of the Block A team here. I do think a couple things do that, Linda, and we could definitely go to the rest of the commission on that end. We could probably those are great comments. Those are probably things we could probably dig in more as we focus on the block specific areas. But those service drives, whether it be the surface treatment, some of the notching at A actually does a very similar thing to C, where it actually tries to cache where the service parking entry is along Service Drive. I think in those future meetings, it'll be much more clear how we're treating Service Drive and trying to terminate it, or at least delineate that it is separate from the Thomas Edison Way there. But the points are very well taken there.
Okay, that's helpful, Kearns. Right now it reads very similar. I don't really see a different character there, urban design character there, as it makes that transition. And I think there should be, and just kind of an understanding of how you want that to be experienced.
And maybe if we have time at the end of all the comments, we can go back to the ground floor plan of A, which was part of the site plan, and we can at least get that conversation started. But I know there's lots of other commissioners that have comments.
Yeah, and I think that was slide 36, maybe, Tim. At least that's what I jotted down. Yeah, so again, the street section looks really similar to me, further down Thomas Edison there. And then any comments on the turbine alley?
Yes, we would at Gensler also be pleased to speak to that. That's sort of the realm we're working on between Block C and Turbine Hall 3. We could start that conversation now, but I am noting that other commissioners have comments. So thought, should we hear those first and come back to it?
Well, I guess at the most elemental level, even if you look at this illustrative, there's really nothing, there's nothing interesting that's being shown here in terms of the urban experience along Turbine Alley. And so I'm just curious about that, curious why it's not part of that open space diagram we looked at a second ago, and kind of what your thoughts are.
Yeah, and I could jump in, Victor. Is, from the diagram's perspective, it was kind of linking some of the major open spaces. We, actually, Linda, what you had said earlier, we totally agree that it's an important space for connecting, and especially if you're coming from west of the site along East First Street. I actually think it's going to be a very impressive alternative to going down Summer Street and then turning right into the site. You probably saw it in some of the 3D views better than kind of the diagramming. Just, we actually agree that it's going to be a very special experience. I think the facade of Block C needs a little bit more development and study. And the west facades of the turbine hall is going to be porous. There's going to be connectivity there, active activity, and we're showing graphically potentially some lights connecting between and more of an urban scape rather than having like planting and lots of green there. But basically we agree, and I think in future meetings we can show you a little bit more about what's happening between the spaces.
Yeah, I would just add quickly on that as well. In terms of, it's kind of the center of the turbine precinct in some ways. So we do love it, and the idea of being able to kind of pass along and really celebrate that facade that's never been exposed. It's, if you've been by the site today, it's an amazing texture. It'll be really cool to see it. I think as far as the stretch between Thomas Edison Way and East First, that ground floor of Turbine Hall 3 is civic space. And the Block C retail is kind of more towards East First in terms of real center of activity, retail spill out, that kind of vibrancy of program that's happening a little bit further towards the waterfront. And so it's, I think we've been trying to think about it sort of in its entirety of, where is the destination? Where do you want to stop? And where are you kind of passing through? But definitely comments are heard, getting into more of what the character of that space really wants to be along that stretch.
All right, great. I mean, your graphics may just not have caught up to kind of some of the ideas that are bubbling.
Sure.
So look forward to seeing that in the future. Shauna, I saw your hand up earlier, but I don't see it anymore.
No, it was it. I took it down just because I thought it was time for me to start talking, and I usually forget to take it down. So, so thank you. And I think the presentation was extremely exciting. There was a lot of information. It was very a little hard to follow just because there was so much information. And I think it's an extremely exciting project. I might as well start with Turbine Hall. I was actually going to end up that direct. No, actually, I'm going to start with the other spaces and then come back to Turbine Hall. I think that one, first of all, as I said, it's a very exciting project. When moving through the green spaces, what's called the Thomas Edison Plaza, but is primarily green, and a lot of the other spaces, it may just be the focus on grading and representation, but a lot of it felt more like passage spaces and green spaces. And it could possibly be just the level of development that the project, probably is the level of development that the project is in, but getting a sense of more how these spaces are subtly differentiated from each other and what actually takes place in those spaces. And because there's so many angles and directions, there ends up with a lot of triangular pieces that are somewhat similar. I don't have a problem with that in principle. I just want to understand what the overall character and spatial occupation is. Just not just at the edges, but in the middle. How do you create differentiation? Even when coming down all of the terraced slopes, I think in development to give it a more I wouldn't say sort of consistent character, but a character that feels derived from the occupation more so than the movement. And again, this may just be representation. I was wondering about, at the end of the sort of sloping down spaces, is this a place where you actually do want to create a somewhat of a performance space so activities can take place and it becomes more of an amphitheater? And so with all of the and I don't know if it's the right balance of sort of complex angles in different directions or not yet. I think that's a, for me, that's an open question. I think that when there is sort of a level of relief, it also might have been that Victor's videos where, you know, we moved around a lot in the animation, so it may just be sort of spatial disorientation. But when we got down to the area, the lower and the upper waterfront, it was absolutely lovely, just having a little bit of calm in those spaces, and really exciting and wonderful that of what those spaces are going to become, and you know, and be, and you can envision yourself in it. And so on a more subtle level with a couple of other places, I have questions. One of them is Turbine Hall. With me, the question is really about the grade difference between Block C and the seating steps, because the seating steps are somewhat challenging in that you're looking into the side of the building. So I'm wondering if I know that the floor to floor height doesn't look that high for the first floor in Block C, but is there a possibility of exploring a split floor in some way, so that there's, given that that side of Block C, so much of it is back of house, if there was a more direct relationship to the Turbine Hall passage or the alley, the connector space, I think, from a level change on the Block C side, just as it's bracketing the entrance, and then of course also directing it to the street. I think, you know, you've done a really impressive job of all of the, you know, the grade connections to all of the floors throughout. I think there's other things, a block, is it, I'm not sure which it was, if it was Block B, where you were walking along the street and it was, there was kind of a balcony that was raised up above the street level. I think that, you know, I think in development, just the character of that should go a level further. I think that's probably more of an architectural than a landscape question. And then just going through my notes. Ultimately, a shade study, probably the next time to understand the shade of the sun and shade conditions. And then the other thing that I thought was, first of all, the passage through Turbine Alley, or through the Turbine Building, is pretty spectacular in both locations, both in the end and in the middle. What I was disappointed with in looking through the mid-block connector is the view on the other side. The view of the parking drop-off area, from looking from sort of Plan South through that passage to the parking drop-off. So I think other people may have comments on that drop-off area. And again, many of my comments are I believe are primarily just the level, with respect to the level of development that the project is at. I think that's enough for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Shauna. Bill?
Thank you, Linda. Thank you to the team. Let me just compliment you on the presentation, which I think was unbelievably clear and done at a pace that we could all understand it and yet keep going through a very complex project. So I compliment you on that. I have long liked this project. Certainly I would say 2 or 3 years ago, when it was first presented to us, I felt that the Turbine Hall was a powerful way to kind of keep this rooted in its site. And there were certain buildings, particularly Building D, which I was quite excited about. I notice now in the comments from community folks, one of the comments said they thought the building seemed humongous. An interesting word for a technical setting. But there is a question of heaviness, and I know heaviness is architectural, not about the landscape, but since we're going to see some more of the architecture, I think it's good to at least raise the question. Can you show me a view looking from the north down Summer Street to the edges of Block D and Block C? And this would be elevation or perspective.
Kate, I'm almost thinking that if we go to our animation and pause it,
Yeah.
that might probably be the best that what Commissioner Ron's looking for.
Perfect, Victor. Okay, well, let's stop right there, and then we'll let now can you back up a little, Kate? Okay, we can stop there, and then we'll go down the block a little more. I am troubled by what seems to be a pattern of architectural moves here, of having the upper floors extend over the sidewalks in a way that makes those upper floors feel bigger and heavier. So you see that, I'll call it the third floor overlap here, and then the fourth floor overlap. Then go down the street a little farther, Kate. Here it comes again at the second level, and then keep going, please. All the way, why don't we go to building C? Okay. And right here is fine. So these are 3 or 4 examples of where the upper floors extend out over the open space. And I'm feeling these buildings are big. We grant you that, but at the same time, they're potentially quite handsome. And I don't remember that building C 2 years ago had that much of an overlap over the spaces below, but I could be wrong. But I'm finding this repetition along Summer Street of extension of upper floors to be disconcerting if one's trying to master the question of heaviness and mass and girth of the project. And so I would love someone to say slightly why that these overlaps are necessary architecturally and whether they can be reviewed.
Thank you, Commissioner Ron. I think I can speak to Block C.
Victor, maybe just before
yes.
before you
Yeah,
do,
I'm sorry.
Commissioner Ron, Melissa Schrock, just to be clear, Block D was part of phase 1, and that has been reviewed. And you're correct as it relates to Block C that we didn't have that overhang previously on Block C because it was a residential tower that was set. There was like a T-shaped sort of podium, and then there was a 200 foot tall tower on Block C. But when we did the use swap between C and A, that got brought down. The building is now a commercial building, so it is bulkier, but it is lower.
And how about building plot site C? D is in David.
Block D is within the footprint and the mass that we have been looking at for many years. In fact, it's under the square footage that was originally approved in the master plan. We went through the phase 1 approval with Payette's, the architect of this building. They're not here tonight because we've been through the BCDC process and through BPDA board with them already. So those insets that you're referring to were actually design moves that we worked on largely with you guys, but then also with BPDA staff in order to create a little bit larger public realm and also to denote things like where the entries are, where the corner is as you're coming up to the street. So those were specific design moves that were worked through quite some time ago.
Well, I apologize for bringing up something that
It's okay.
one can say we reviewed and approved, but I must say if we're looking at these buildings again, I'm just finding the buildings seem much heavier than I remembered, and so I was trying to figure out why, and maybe I'm wrong on how I assess that, but I do find there's a heaviness and there's not a lightness to these buildings whatsoever along Summer Street. And I'm worried about that.
We hear your comments. I would just hope that we're not going to relitigate Block D, because it's in CDs at this point. And Victor, though, I think you could probably address some of the commentary on Block C.
Yeah, so just a quick summary of where we are here on Block C. We have a series of diagrams that I'm sure we'll come back to when we talk architecture, but we essentially began with the zoning envelope and then carved away at it in multiple areas through this folding morphology. And on the Summer Street facade, there are essentially two intersecting moves. So what we can see here is the outermost point. Okay, can you go back? The outermost point on what we call the upper mass is the only point along that facade that actually touches the 30-foot setback from Summer Street. And in order to address some of the comments on heaviness, we created this crease in the center and then folded the facade away from that crease. So whether you're looking at the building from the north or from the south, you're really perceiving only half of that facade on your side of the crease. And then at the lower portion, which then creates the overhang, none of that base actually comes all the way to the 30-foot setback. It is all pulled back from the setback and then further folds inward to architecturally communicate where the building entrance is. And as I mentioned, to create this linear plaza along Summer Street, both to give that pedestrian space a little breathing room, accommodate the bikes, and some outdoor programming for retail. Now, the resultant of those folds is that a portion of the upper mass hangs over the lower mass, which we think provides an inherent canopy and shelter for the entrance. So obviously all arguable points, but these folds all pull away from the zoning massing and fold in a way to mitigate the mass and the sense of heaviness. That's the intent.
Well, I'm certainly cognizant that if all these buildings had just flat facades that started the sidewalk and went to the parapets, that those could be deadly dull. So I fully understand that. Just pardon this noise. I just am a little worried that the pardon this noise. And I hear you, Victor, very well, and you've answered my question to some degree, but I'm just a tad worried that this heaviness is going to get us into trouble. So that's my comment first.
And I know Victor and others will be taking a closer look at this building in future subcommittees. So
I realize.
And so I'm hoping, Bill, we might maybe even just see the genesis of some of the crease and the setbacks and things like that as well.
Good to start the discussion, though. Thank you for those comments.
Thank you.
David?
Oh, thanks, Linda. Can we, first of all, I've got to join the chorus. This was really an excellent presentation. And from the diagrams that explained your process and the animations, I'm thinking that when we have multi-building, multi-block projects, we should make that, if we can't have models and we can't be together, then we should make mandatory that kind of walk around the site at its perimeter and through its major pathways as a pedestrian, exactly what you did. And I echo Bill. You did it at a pace that most times when I see animations, I just want to tell you to stop. It's too fast. I
You get car sick. You get car sick.
Well, and I haven't absorbed it all yet, but the pace was really good. the thoroughness of walking around, I really do feel I understand it so much better. Two or three things. Number one, if you could go to 47, which is the same one Linda asked you to go to, I found this to be a very powerful. Is that 47? I'm sorry, then I got the wrong one. But I can use this one. Yeah, that's fine. That's maybe I have the right one. I have the right one. This made me think that I like this diagram a lot. It makes me think that there's this kind of industrial assemblage of buildings of different types that were all contained at one point in time by a fence, and happened in the sort of middle of a city that had a very regular grid of streets. You can find this replicated in power plant sites like this, and steel mill kind of sites like this, shipyards, because the buildings kind of came not one at a time, and sometimes it was organized, and sometimes it was a little bit haphazard. And what this diagram explains to me is there is this hard edge at Summer and East First Street, and even against the channel, and then to the north, and then in the middle there's this irregularity, as if you're driving, not only driving through buildings, you're driving around buildings, in a way that when you get a tour of these kinds of sites, you almost get a little bit disoriented, because you're driving around in the middle, and there's alleyways, and all of that I find very fascinating. And I think that your interior pathway of Thomas Edison, the explanation that Jared gave, it was really good. I mean, it really crystallized for me this kind of distinction of the edge to city and the interior path that was once part of a whole, meaning this giant energy power plant, but that now is made up of these disparate parts. And I think as a diagram, that's really very powerful. I struggle a little bit, and Bill hit on, and Shauna hit on a couple things that trouble me a little bit, and one of them is, and they're related to each other. One of them is, I think Shauna said, I don't know yet what to think about the triangular pieces, and I'm not sure I know yet what to think about those triangular pieces, which are mostly site related, a little bit building related, and is there too many of them? And not that we, well, I'll speak for myself. Block D is very strong. I think that there's no desire to go back and re-examine it, but I wonder if it's a theme used too often. And that's one of the things of the walkthrough that I thought of. Bill said it very well. He talked about the heaviness. I was thinking about, as you walked us around all the perimeters, that there was a lot of places where things were over my head, and I wondered about if that was comfortable as pedestrian ways. And it seems to be a theme. It seems, and I don't think it is, but it just seems to be a repeated strategy that maybe is repeated once or twice too often. That was, and then there was, oh, I know, there was a third point I wanted to make, and that was this. Probably the thing that I'm still unconvinced of is at the very center, which is so important, that where Thomas Edison turns, whichever direction you're coming from. There's an awful lot of vehicular intersection going on there, the drop off for the hotel, the access to parking, and the service. And I get it. Your service has got to come off Thomas Edison. You want to get to the front door of the hotel. And I was starting to resolve all that in my mind. And then when I got to the animation, I guess I never realized, and I should have, because you gave us all all that grading information, that at that point, the car is actually elevated at the drop off, which made it even more of a tangle for me. And I wonder about that as a pedestrian, if I'm really going to be comfortable on that edge of, let's see, on the north side of Thomas Edison as a pedestrian with everything that's going on, my relationship as a pedestrian to the cars, crossing a driveway, a service drive, another driveway, and I'm not sure whether parking's in here somewhere. I'm not sure that, and then the grades troubled me there when I realized that car was up. I'm not sure how much, but above the sidewalk. When I was on the sidewalk and the car was up, felt like almost eye level. I'm sure it's not that high, but I'm not convinced of what's happening on the east side of Block E as part of public realm. And I don't want to ask you to go through the animation again, but I would ask you to go through the animation again to see all those grades. But I'll repeat what others have said. This is a wonderful project, there's so many good things here about what you're doing, and I think we're focused on a few more things to look at.
Thank you, David. And I know, we've got 2 subcommittees to come. One of them's a double. Oh yeah, there it is.
There it is, yeah.
And there's where you kind of have to actually realign yourself as a pedestrian and get back on the sidewalk over the service and parking access, which is tricky.
It's not about the reason the view shifts to the right, Commissioner Eastley, is actually about where the pedestrian only opening through the turbine halls is happening.
Understood. Yeah, but when you come through that opening, you then have to kind of turn right and then align yourself left, because you're dumped out really in the service drive. Yeah.
Yeah, because for the main pass through, we only have enough width, and we're taking down a bay, right? So we're occupying like 2 bays and putting in a new lintel there, but we only have enough width to fit in vehicular pathways with the cycle track. So we don't have enough space to get through on the one side, the pedestrians.
Right. And I think that the way you come out of that is perfectly solvable.
Yeah, just if you could put that view back up. This is a little bit of an aside, but the shaping of, we studied this view for the slight rotation of Block A and the carving of Block A too. That this is a place where that prominent corner of Block A starts to terminate the street. And one of the advantages of slightly rotating that north face of A is it closes down that view corridor to nowhere, because otherwise that zooms off into MBTA and substation land. So it made the terminus of Thomas Edison much more satisfying than having that view orthogonal.
And also just add, it's obviously not the answer everywhere, but we did bias the drop off and the drive a little bit closer to the buildings in order to widen that planting zone in between the sidewalk and the drive. The idea being that there we could really work with a plant palette, to help screen or to really kind of make the sidewalk feel a little bit more welcoming, but then also, perhaps mitigate some of that visual impact of the cars there.
And answering Commissioner Eastley's very early comments, there's a scrim of trees down Service Drive about halfway down that separate the active pedestrian edge of Block A from the service area behind, which isn't quite clear in the diagram. You can see the row of trees and then behind it is really like a service plaza. And that's because there's active edges along that edge of Block A. But when we get into the building by building subcommittee meetings, we can walk each other.
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, at that point, I feel like at the inflection of that road, I almost want the service drive to disappear or become kind of narrower for that use so that it doesn't necessarily become a primary pedestrian zone. But the triangle, I liked what David said, you know, triangles everywhere. But that triangle encourages the pedestrian to kind of hang out there. And I'm just not sure that those are in concert with each other. But thank you all for the presentation and for the commissioners for your comments. I know we want to shift to public comment now. I actually have another commitment at 6:30. So Christina, I'm going to shift the public comment over to you if I can. And I'm looking forward to seeing you all in the next two subcommittees. So thank you so much.
Commissioner.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand and staff will call on you. If you're calling in by phone, dial *9 to activate the raise hand function and *6 to mute and unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information, and please keep your comments to 2 minutes. Just giving a couple seconds for anyone to raise their hands who may wish to provide public testimony. Okay, commissioners, I have no raised hands at this time.
Christina, I have a raised hand as a commissioner.
Oh, you do?
Yes.
Well, please go ahead.
And let me I just want to thank David Manfredi for his comment about this being a wonderful template for future presentations we might have of complex projects like this. And I just would suggest to us commissioners, but also the staff, to encourage following the clarity of this presentation and trying to replicate that on other similar complex projects.
We would be happy to, Commissioner Ron. I'm worried, though, that if you said you had a hand raised and I did not see it, that maybe others from the public had a hand raised that I did not see. Is there anybody who wishes to provide public testimony?
Well, I learned today how to raise my hand, and there I have it raised. Do you see it raised?
No.
No, actually, I do not.
Okay.
Which is concerning to me. So is there anyone who would like to provide public testimony who can put something in the chat? Oh, I see Shauna. I see, yes, I see some hands.
It was just a test.
Excellent.
Mm.
It's much appreciated. It gives me anxiety that I can't see anybody's hands raised. Okay.
And we saw Bill's too.
Yes.
Thank
So
you.
we will close public testimony. Thank you, commissioners, for your time. No votes needed since this is subcommittee, and I think we're all clear that the team will be coming back to a future subcommittee session. So with that, I thank members of the public and the commissioners and the presenters for their time this evening. I think we can call this meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Commissioners.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Christina.
everybody.
Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you, everyone.
Much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.